Yeah. Okay, no, here we go. So, yeah, my name is Amanda Scott, and I completed the master's, I think, in 2021. My dissertation is called Relighting the Fire: Can Somatic Meditation Influence Burnout Symptoms in Healthcare Professionals? And it's an autoethnographic study. So I'm just going to start my timer so I don't go too far over. Yeah, so what's an autoethnographic study? My original intention was to find a set of body-based mindfulness practices that I could trial with healthcare workers. I think I became a little bit obsessed by the idea of embodiment. And actually, when I think of it, it was Chodin's fault, because he said, yeah, people, and for example, Tibetan cultures of the West are more embodied than us in the West. So people in the East are more embodied than us in the West. And I was like, what does that mean? What does embodiment mean? And so it kind of sent me on a whole journey. And I was looking at burnout. And what happened is, when I started looking at the symptoms of burnout, I realized that I was completely burnt out. So that was not what I expected. And after talking to the brilliant tutors at the at University of Aberdeen, I was kind of, oh, it's moved on. I was kind of persuaded that, yeah, autoethnography is not necessarily narcissistic or egotistical, but actually, you know, by sharing one's story and having a narrative, you know, that's a valid research methodology. So autoethnography is auto is self, ethno is the sociogeographic, the social group that you're part of, and graphy is the study. So I ended up studying myself, and burnout was kind of, the ideas of burnout was developed in the 60s by this guy Freudenberger, and he was kind of just becoming aware of these symptoms. But he had this idea that, you know, if you think you're burning out, you can be certain you've assumed a posture of denial in critical areas of your life. And he was talking about like relationship burnout, job burnout, cultural burnout. So he had a sort of very wide scope of what burnout was. I suppose maybe on reflection, it's looking at that sort of industrialized society. And, you know, we had a few years after the Second World War, you know, people starting to exhibit these symptoms. So really about this idealized self, and the disparity between the idealized self and what's happening in your reality, and that mismatch or disconnect. So I don't know why this is moving on by itself. It must be on a timer, so sorry about that. So what are the symptoms generally of burnout now? I mean, it is a common stress-related disorder. It is in, I can't see my notes, but it is in the, you know, in the directory of disease. You know, it's a classification, the World Health Organization, generally related to workplace stress and workplace mismanaged stress in the workplace. But certainly, you know, there was a lot of focus on burnout, and I started all this before COVID. So certainly even, you know, post-COVID, and in the healthcare system with healthcare workers, I think that, you know, it's probably even more of an issue now. What are the symptoms? There is this idea of a kind of emotional exhaustion. It's like your battery just doesn't get recharged. You're just operating on empty. And this increased depersonalization, which is kind of like a lack of empathy, but you're aware that your empathy isn't there where it used to be, which is kind of distressing. And it's related to kind of trauma or secondary trauma, also maybe compassion fatigue. However, I would say some of the work that I read would dispute the term compassion fatigue, because like real compassion can't be fatigued. It's this flow. So maybe empathetic distress disorder might be a better term than compassion fatigue. And also that lack of personal accomplishment, like you just don't feel like you're making a difference. I was working as a healthcare professional with a group, cohort, that there was a high incidence of burnout amongst healthcare professionals working with this group, and for a number of reasons, and sort of really dealing with a lot of trauma, PTSD, stress, and all the issues that can lead to that. Yeah, so what's somatic meditation? If you're aware of a body scan, somatic meditation is kind of like a body scan, but turned up to 11. Like, so the body is the whole arena. There's no like compassionate figures or looking some of the other practices that we do. It's purely around the body, and it can be like just the big toe. For example, your whole practice for an hour can be on the big toe, and the idea is that you almost like go through the layers of experience, the experience that is held in the body. And it, yeah, so it's quite a deep practice. I did a 10-week course. It was based on maybe some Tibetan Buddhist practices originally, but had been kind of westernized. So it was a 10-week course. There was some reading, some books to look at. There was one-to-one peer support. There was mentoring. There was group support, and it was a minimum of 1 hour per day. So after 10 weeks, you clocked up like quite a lot of hours of the practice. And what did I do? My methodology was that I journaled the 10-week course. So I was making notes kind of daily, and that became my data. That was my my body of data, that I would write it and leave it. I left it for a bit, and then kind of went back when I was actually writing my thesis. And then I did a thematic analysis of my own journal. And then when those themes came out, I investigated some of the themes a bit more deeply. So there is like an element of like vulnerability in a way, doing autoethnography, but the idea is that being witnessed, it can be valuable, but also for me it was also about this might be useful for somebody else. So I didn't get my original mindfulness based body practices, but maybe my story, my narrative, and my learning could be useful from other people. But I would say that this research methodology, you have to be pretty resourced, and I think it's important to have a good support network, and obviously great supervisors, and with the Mindfulness Association and all that peer support is incredibly important. So what were the themes that came out for me? So starting with this not in terribly happy looking infant, I would say that through the somatic meditation, so you're accessing afferent neural pathway, so the pathway that comes from the body up to the brain, rather than the efferent, which is brain down. But the embodiment is the whole body, brain, and kind of how the mind is obviously kind of controlling both of the body, brain. So it is, I have since sort of moved on my thinking a little bit, and I don't agree with the like body brain disconnect, because it's the mind that's doing all this. But anyway, maybe that's a little bit off piste. So when you're deeply accessing what is held within the body, it can bring up some issues that you realize are habitual patterns from the very deep past. And I was born 1970. There was a sort of specific way of raising children or infants at that time. Like, you know, people were terrified they were going to spoil their children. So the children were kind of, or the infants, they're kind of put away somewhere. I'd left to cry. That could be quite a normal practice. And Dr. Gabor Mate looks a lot at this. He talks about proximal separation. So even though your caregiver is there, but if they're not like present, or they're distracted, or they're doing something else, the infant, who obviously regulates themselves through the mirror neurons of the caregiver, is not able to regulate and experiences that proximal separation as an existential threat. And so the nervous system is sort of calibrated in a particular way, which can be, you know, like almost like going into a survival mode. So Dr. Gabor Mate would talk about how embodiment is disrupted, and that can sort of set the scene for how the infant or how that person then presents in life. And one of the next themes was this idea of shame, which shame, it's very interesting that, you know, I've heard it described as like a outmoded survival instinct when you're in the pack, to show that you weren't a threat. You know, there's a kind of body language associated with shame. But also for me, or how it manifested, was almost like, I've got a little like tin person there. It's like a hardening to experience, a protection of the vulnerability. So when you are doing your somatic meditation, you become aware of like the hardening, the resistance, these painful layers, which almost felt like metal layers. And through seeing these layers, the seeing is the doing, there was an impact on the body and on the mind. One of the computer modelings that one of the papers I read, it might be that the seeing these habitual pathways, it uncouples the neural networks so that it frees resources for a sort of increased experience. So it's not stuck in these sort of biased, fused together neural pathways, which obviously are survival technique. Oh yeah, I know this, I've got this, you know, we harden to our experience rather than actually fully being present. And that leads me on to another theme, which was very fascinating, called somatization. I hadn't realized quite how common somatization is, and this is a pain without an origin almost. It presents often GPs. There's different ways it may affect males and females, and the somatization pain can be something like the idea that the pain matrix is stimulated. And for me, this was really around, and together with the shame, it was around how like females are in a patriarchal society, and how the female experience, you know, we're generally, you know, we're less safe, we're less heard, we're not as equal, how that the body can manifest this pain, somatic pain, and we don't really know where it's coming from, but there's something telling us that something's not right. So this was, I mean, like, you could do a whole thesis on somatization and how powerful the mind is, and through creating, you know, pain. There's also another theory that actually the somatization is the neurons trying to heal themselves and reconnect. So maybe like moving through the body, that they're actually creating new axons, which I just think is utterly fascinating, that just from focusing your attention, that you're impacting the neural pathways in your body, and that your body is healing from attention. You know, it's kind of mind-blowing. And so another theme that came up for me was this transformation. So again, the seeing is the doing, going through these incredibly painful experiences, actually even going to the doctors at one point, you know, really convinced there's something terribly wrong with me. But it was essentially somatization and doing my practice, moved through that. Then there's a transformation and a freedom from this neuralgic pain it was for me. And the transformation was almost like the idea of realizing the habitual patterns, realizing the belief systems that one had held, and them altering just through the seeing, through the experiencing of them. And this led to, for me, the agency and power, because what happened was when I finally admitted to myself that my job, where I was getting burnt out, and by the way, it's really hard to recover from burnout if you stay in the same circumstances. So when I realized that that my job wasn't fulfilling me anymore, and this realization almost came on a Thursday morning, and I thought, I have to look for another job, and I found one that looked amazing, within the NHS, but it was all about teaching mindfulness and compassion. Couldn't believe it. Applied for that, got an interview on the Monday, and by the Monday night I had a new job, and it was very much like you know, the hero's journey, when if you follow your bliss or follow your truth, like doors open where before you didn't know that there were any. And so, you know, that was very much my experience, sort of miraculous change. So yeah, I changed my job, but I had the power, when I realized what was really happening with me, I had the power to change myself. So yeah, can somatic meditation influence burnout in healthcare professionals? I would say yes, it can. I don't know how well the NHS is like set up really for these body-based practices for, you know, their workers. I would say there's probably a little bit of resistance to it. But, you know, I think it's really important that we can be with our authentic selves, and that we can change and make change, because how we are as ourselves, you know, can influence society and culture at large. So yeah, I think that's me. So I'm going to stop sharing.